Well, this franchise is still on top of its diegetic music game. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today we're going to be continuing my Conjuring Universe review series with the 2021 supernatural horror sequel, The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It stars Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga, and Rory O'Connor, and was directed by Michael Chavez. Based on the trial of Arnie Johnson, it follows Ed and Lorraine Warren as they investigate the mysterious forces at work that caused Johnson to commit murder. The Conjuring universe is one of those frustratingly inconsistent franchises. From a production standpoint, they're all really good, but in terms of story, they're very hit or miss. Many of the spin-off films in the franchise leave something to be desired, but the core Conjuring films have been excellent up to this point. Both of them had creepy, interesting stories, wonderful performances from Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga as the Warrens, and had James Wan in the director's chair. This third film sees some changes, including a different director. Michael Chavez has had some experience within the franchise, directing The Curse of La Llorona, but I was definitely a little wary of Wan's absence here. And after watching the film, although the directorial change is noticeable to me, I didn't think it had a major impact on the film, likely because Wan still wrote and produced this one. That said, this third film is very different from the previous two. Not because of the cinematography, which is fantastic as usual, or even because of the director's style, but because of the story. The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2 were both variants of haunted house possession stories. In both instances, we watched the buildup of supernatural occurrences with the families, and then once the Warrens were called in, we watched them do their thing, working directly with the families to help expel the demon. This third film takes a different approach to almost all of that. There's still a possession element to the story, but being vague so as to avoid spoilers, it's very different due to the catalyst and how it manifests itself. And even the way the Warrens are involved in the case is a little bit different. They're still trying to help somebody, but it's much less of a hands-on paranormal investigation than usual for these stories. It's more of a traditional investigation with supernatural overtones. They're looking through case files and books and talking with the police, trying to piece things together. It's structured like a mystery or detective story, with the Warrens not only trying to figure out what happened, but also prove that it actually happened. This film doesn't have quite the courtroom drama focus that the trailers seem to imply it would, which was a little disappointing for me because I thought that was a very interesting direction to go with a film like this, but the way the story is approached is still quite different than what we've gotten in any of the other movies. The Conjuring films are all supernatural horror movies, so there's obviously a bit of an expectation that we're going to be dealing with some slightly unbelievable things, whether that be the evil entities themselves, the things happening to the family in question, or even some of the methods used by the Warrens. But despite some of those more supernatural elements, the previous two films had this kind of grounded feel to them, because of the logic and structure behind the Warrens' methodology. This third film, on the other hand, felt way more supernatural. It leaned much more heavily on Lorraine's abilities, which felt a little odd, and even the catalyst for the story, again, avoiding spoilers, was a completely different type of supernatural than we've seen before. These differences aren't necessarily bad things, they just feel a bit out of sync with what's been set up in the past. The same thing can be said about the tone of this film, and that's one place where I do think the change in director is especially noticeable. In the first two films, Wan was able to create this sense of dread within the stories. The first Conjuring had an incredibly tension-filled slow burn of a build-up that was viscerally scary. The second movie moved things along a bit quicker, but still delivered on its tension and scares, once again crafting this ominous sensation. That same effect was never achieved here. In terms of the horror aspects of the story, there was never really a continuing buildup of tension beyond the first act. There was never that overwhelming sense of dread and fear. There were quite a few jump scares, but it was frequently creepy and definitely had its moments. The waterbed scene that features in one of the trailers, the opening sequence, which is by far the most exciting part of the movie, but it struggles to maintain much of a horror identity between those types of scenes. Luckily, Ed and Lorraine are just as compelling as ever and really help to counterbalance some of the issues in this film. As usual, the positives here are actually twofold: the characters themselves and then the performances. On the character side, we see further development of the emotional aspects. The first film introduced them as this great, effective pair, but the second movie really took the time to flesh them out and focus on why they were so compatible. This third film digs even deeper into them as a couple. At this point, they'd been together for decades, and it really shows. There's a tense subplot involving Ed that heightens the emotions even beyond those of the second film. But there's also some nice romantic elements and even some playfulness and humor between the two at times, probably my favorite example of which culminates in Ed holding Lorraine's purse. But like I said, it's not just the characters, but also the performances. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga just have this great chemistry with one another. They're believable as this married couple, but also as their individual characters, each of whom brings something unique to the table. As with all of the films in the Conjuring universe, this movie is a period piece. It's set in 1981, making it not only the newest film released, but also the most recent story in the chronology of the universe. And I don't know if it's just because it's a little more modern than any of the others, but I didn't get quite the same period vibe from this one. Everything looked year appropriate. The costumes, the hairstyles, the waterbed, but unlike many of the other films, I don't think I would have been able to pinpoint the year just from the visuals. Luckily, like most of the other films in the franchise, this one has some really great music, all of which at least begin diegetically within scenes, which is something I always love. But thinking back on the 4 songs used, only one was an 80s song, so even the music doesn't really scream 1981. But I can't complain too much, because they did use my favorite Blondie song, and in a very intense and pivotal scene. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 is the new story angle. Now, that's not to say that I think this detective investigation angle is better than the more traditional paranormal investigations in the first 2 films, but I do really appreciate the attempts to mix up the formula a bit here. I thought it was really interesting seeing Ed and Lorraine off doing their own thing together, rather than just being primarily bound to the family in need of help. I mean, they're still helping, but it's in a slightly different way, and I thought that was interesting. I just wish they went a little bit more down the courtroom drama, procedural side of things. It was definitely about the case, but not really about the trial so much, which I personally think would have been interesting to see at least bits of. The second pro is one that's been a mainstay in the pros column for many of the films in the Conjuring universe, and that's the cinematography. This movie actually features the same cinematographer as the last 2 movies in the franchise, The Curse of La Llorona and Annabelle Comes Home, and from a visual standpoint, it definitely has a lot more in common with those films than the previous core Conjuring movies. But aside from some CGI issues, I thought both of those 2019 films looked really good, and I'm happy with how this one looks too. The opening sequence is captured really well, but there are some other nice camera tricks involving Lorraine's abilities, and of course, one of my go-to favorites, the long establishing tracking shot of a new location. On the con side, the biggest issue for me was that this movie was too supernatural. And I realize how dumb that sounds since we're talking about a supernatural horror franchise here, so let me explain. I expect there to be supernatural elements to these stories. I expect there to be ghosts and demons and spirits. I've accepted that Lorraine has these psychic abilities that give her insight into their cases and make her emotionally, spiritually vulnerable. Supernatural, but fine. My issues with the supernatural elements here are that they take it a few steps too far. Lorraine's abilities might as well be powers in this one. And while that's interesting for a movie, it kind of takes away from that grounded, based on real people thing that helped to make these movies so unsettling. It also introduces this somewhat frustrating degree of unreliability to the story, because there are times where we don't know if what we're seeing is actually happened in the past, or isn't real at all. And again, I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bad thing. It just feels a bit out of place and out of sync with the previous 2 Conjuring movies. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It 3.5 out of 5 paws. It's definitely the weakest of the Conjuring trilogy, but it's still a strong film within the greater Conjuring universe that takes things in a unique new story direction while still maintaining the chemistry between the Warrens. I would recommend The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, to fans of the previous Conjuring films. It takes a new approach and has a slightly different tone, but at its core, it still feels like a Conjuring movie. The central case is very interesting, and of course anybody who's previously loved Wilson and Farmiga as the Warrens is gonna love them here too. Tension and tone-wise, this feels a bit closer to some of the more recent spin-off films in the Conjuring universe, so I have a feeling that people who like this franchise as a whole are gonna like this one a bit more than people who only like the two Conjuring movies. If you liked The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, I would recommend The Conjuring 2. Although different, I would say that this third film has more in common with the second than it does with the first. It has a similar, quicker pace to it, and once again, there's a lot of focus on the relationship between Ed and Lorraine Warren. If you like the mystery angle of the story and want another Conjuring universe film along those lines, you might want to check out The Curse of La Llorona, which also was directed by Michael Chavez. It's broadly viewed as one of the lesser films in the franchise, but I think that's a little unwarranted, especially if you go in with the mindset that it's a mystery thriller rather than a horror movie. And if you're interested in another supernatural film about people doing things they wouldn't normally do, you should check out The Shining. There are a couple of plot-based similarities between the two, and this film even includes a shot that's a direct reference to an iconic shot in The Shining. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, which horror film features your favorite opening? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies. The way life should be.